Hello, dorks. Donkey Kong 3 is a very weird game. Not only are you blowing chemicals up Donkey Kong's bum the whole time, but it's a Donkey Kong game where Mario is actually missing from the action. No, not that Mario's missing. Get that out of here. This time, in place of Mario, we have Stanley the Bugman. Stan is an early Nintendo character who's been sort of forgotten by Nintendo and fans over the years, only reappearing in the occasional cameo. When it comes to acknowledging the original Donkey Kong series, it seems like Nintendo only really wants to acknowledge Donkey Kong 1. They basically killed off Donkey Kong Jr. as a character after Mario Tennis on the N64. Wait, where has Donkey Kong Jr. been? Is modern Donkey Kong actually Donkey Kong Jr. all grown up? Is Cranky Kong the original Donkey Kong? That's a video for another day, but seriously, where has my boy Stan been all these years? Despite his obscurity, he's best known as the main character of Donkey Kong 3, but he's actually been around for a bit longer than that. Stanley the Bugman, aka the Fumigator, got his start on the Game & Watch in 1982, entirely separated from the Donkey Kong Mario universe. Well, at least I think that's where he got his start. It's hard to tell because the Game & Watch manual only refers to the character as the Fumigator, but the character is doing exactly what Stanley does in Donkey Kong 3, the arcade game, so let's just assume that this fellow is in fact Stanley. Anyway, first appearing in the Game & Watch titled Greenhouse, we find our friend Stanley acting as an exterminator of sorts. Using his magical sneezing dildo, he manages to fight off bugs from harming his plants in this primitive pastime. Modern Nintendo fans might be quick to say, "No, you fucking idiot, that's Mr. Game & Watch," but this little silhouette fellow is probably Stanley. Keep in mind, Mr. Game & Watch technically didn't exist until 2001 when he was introduced in Smash Bros. Melee. All of the Game & Watch characters are based in silhouette due to the technology of the Game & Watch, so you're really supposed to use your imagination a bit and assume that the silhouette actually belongs to this guy. This game has the player fighting off bugs who want to eat Stanley's plants. There are 2 plants on the top of the screen, 2 plants on the bottom of the screen, and a ladder separating them. You have to continuously go back and forth between the screens to spray insecticide at the bugs. The gameplay is surprisingly quick-paced, and I had a decent amount of fun with this for a short while. Look, critiquing a game this old feels like elder abuse, so I'm not really going to go too hard on it. The easiest way to play this game is buying the Game & Watch collection for Nintendo DS if you still have a Nintendo DS lying around. You can also go a bit more retro than that and pick up a copy of Game & Watch Gallery 3 for the Game Boy Color, but I wouldn't recommend that over the DS version. The DS version is perfect because some Game & Watches had 2 screens. Game Boy Color only has 1. Since the Game Boy Color only has 1 screen, the player has to pick 1 screen to be enlarged, but that shrinks the second screen down to fit on the Game Boy screen. Just pick up the DS game if you're really interested in playing Greenhouse. It would seem like Stanley was set to be a one-off Game & Watch character, but for whatever reason, 1 year later, he became the main character of the arcade game Donkey Kong 3. It's not known exactly why Stanley was chosen over Mario or even Donkey Kong Jr., but since Donkey Kong 3 takes place in a greenhouse anyway, it only makes sense that Stanley would be the character to pick. Is Donkey Kong 3 based on Greenhouse, or was the choice deliberate by Nintendo? Chicken or the egg? Which one came first? Well, I don't freaking know, but it makes you think. By the way, this time we know for sure that the protagonist is Stanley. The arcade flyer said so. Donkey Kong 3 isn't too bad of a game. It's really hard, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes a fun balancing act. Gameplay is simple. You have to spray Donkey Kong in the ass and get him to the top of the screen, but you also have to protect your plants from bugs at the same time. Does that sound familiar yet? Donkey Kong 3 feels more like a sequel to Greenhouse than it does to Donkey Kong Jr. It's not very forgiving, but the gameplay is fun. It really makes you want to come back for another round to beat your personal best. Oh, also, this game is horrific when you die. Bugs will swarm poor Stanley and presumably eat his face off. That is some early video game horror if I have ever seen it. What's bullshit about this game is that Stanley can't squash bugs by jumping on them. Ultimately, I do recommend this game. The most accessible version is currently the one found on the Nintendo Switch eShop. In 1984, Stanley reappeared in the Japanese-only Donkey Kong 3 Daigyakushu, also known as Donkey Kong 3 The Great Counterattack. This one is good in sort of a weird way. It's got more in common with Galaxian or Galaga than it does with Donkey Kong 3. Also, look how cool the backgrounds are. No longer are you restricted to the greenhouse. This game takes Stanley and DK on the road to locations like a highway, a UFO, space, pyramids, and even an active volcano, for plot reasons. You still have to shoot Donkey Kong in the ass, but you also have to kill bugs while trying to balance your fight with Donkey Kong. What's different this time is that you're not protecting plants. This one can be tricky, but it's fun even if it's really hard. You shoot DK away from the screen to clear a level, but you need to also get rid of gross, disgusting bugs if you want to score any points at all. This game is all a balancing act, not unlike vanilla Donkey Kong 3, or even Greenhouse on the Game & Watch. Unlike Greenhouse, we know for sure that this is Stanley since this game goes ahead and puts a big Stanley on the right side of the screen. You can look all you want, but there's no chance of getting your hands on a copy of this game, as it's a very obscure game made only for Japanese PCs. The game itself wasn't even dumped online until 2018. It's that rare and obscure. I had to give a Japanese man one of my kidneys to get access to this one. That same year, there was a Donkey Kong 3 Game & Watch release, but this is where it gets a little confusing. It's confusing because this is a separate release from the original Greenhouse game, but it's also not a port of the arcade version of Donkey Kong 3. This version of Donkey Kong 3 has unique gameplay, making it another alternative version of Donkey Kong 3. The object of the game is to get your opponent stung by bees while avoiding them yourself. It's almost like a fucked up version of Pong. Once again, the characters are Stanley and Donkey Kong. You have to try to spray the bees away from you while also turning around to collect insecticide, which is falling from a giant vat above you. Again, we know for sure it's Stanley. I mean, look at him compared to the guy from Greenhouse. Plus, the instruction manual confirms that this is in fact Stanley. Playing it for this video wasn't the best time. I think this game is alright, but I think I'm not playing it in the right context. The reason why I say that is because this game would definitely be way more fun with a human opponent, like the way it was intended to be played. If you want a hard copy of this game, your best bet is picking up the Game & Watch Gallery 4 for the Game Boy Advance. Oh boy, 6 games in one! You can also go crazy and get the original thing on eBay. I'm not gonna stop you. I wouldn't recommend buying the GBA version unless you're a Stanley completionist, which I think I am? I don't know. I think I have to talk this one over with my therapist. 84 was a huge year for our friend Stan, as he made his animated debut as a character in the now forgotten Saturday Supercade. This was an animated anthology show which starred various video game characters having wacky cartoon fun. In the episode titled Greenhouse Gorilla, Stanley is teamed up with Mario and Pauline. Not Peach, Pauline. In this cartoon, Mario and Pauline work for the circus, and I guess Donkey Kong has escaped from that circus? Some asshole named Mr. X convinced Donkey Kong to steal Stanley's prized plant, so Pauline and Mario team up with Stanley since they're already hunting down Donkey Kong. Hijinks ensue as it's revealed that Stanley's plant can eat metal. The heroes end up mostly on top in typical Saturday morning fashion, and we never saw animated Stan again. There was never a home release of this show, so it's a miracle I could find this episode, as this is considered partially lost media. Do you see what I do for you, dorks? After that, everything would seem to fade to black for our friend Stan the Man. Outside of the Donkey Kong 3 home ports on the NES, Stanley didn't make an appearance again until 1997's Game & Watch Gallery 2, and even that, he was only a cameo. For those keeping score at home, that's over 10 years without our friend Stanley. Like I said, you could play Greenhouse in Game & Watch Gallery 3, which was the first time Stanley was more than a cameo since the 1980s. In 2001, Stanley got modernized a bit in Super Smash Bros. Melee, where he was finally given a 3D model when he appeared as a trophy. Trophies in Smash Melee were like little nods to Nintendo's past. They kind of served as an encyclopedia for Nintendo history at that point. Did this mean it was time for Stanley to shine once again? Now that he had a 3D model, would we be seeing more of our forgotten friend? Well, no, not exactly. His appearance would only remain as a cameo in the Smash Bros. Series. He shows up from time to time in brief cameos whenever Donkey Kong 3 is mentioned. You can find him in WarioWare minigames starting with 2005's WarioWare Twisted, and he stuck around the series sporadically for other retro minigames found throughout the WarioWare series. Though he's playable in the WarioWare games, it almost feels like he's not, because the whole point of WarioWare is playing little bite-sized 5-second games. So while we do get Stanley, it just isn't enough, is it? Also, the Donkey Kong 3 minigame in WarioWare Touched is oddly sensual? You have to blow into the DS's built-in microphone, but it's implied that you're blowing right up Donkey Kong's ass. It all just feels a little too personal. Look, Donkey Kong, I love you, but not like that. Stanley can also be found in the Donkey Kong 3 sections of NES Remix and the Wii U, but I'm gonna be real with you, dog, I don't own a Wii U because it's Wii U. So, what happened? Well, Stanley never set the world on fire in the first place. He was in the worst performing original Donkey Kong game at the time, so it feels like he never got a fair shake. Donkey Kong 1 was huge, Donkey Kong Jr. was less popular, but still pretty big, and Donkey Kong 3 was even less popular than the previous two games. Also, Donkey Kong 3 came out at the worst possible time for the United States gaming industry. The game was a little bigger in Japan, but gaming as a whole was not healthy in 1983 for the United States. If you want to see me make a video on that, leave a comment down below. Nintendo has given Stanley little cameos here and there, but they haven't given him the full nostalgia treatment like they give someone like Rob the Robot. It's actually weird that Rob is given more love than Stanley. I mean, Rob wasn't even a video game character. He was technically hardware. Donkey Kong 3 is sort of a forgettable game, so I guess that makes Stanley a forgettable character. Besides Stanley's inclusion as a Smash trophy, Mr. Game & Watch also has a jab move that's a tribute to Stanley, and that's probably the most relevant Stanley will get in the modern era. I do have high hopes for Stanley being included in the next Mario movie. I mean, they gave freaking Foreman Spike an appearance in the movie, and he was probably the more obscure character before that appearance. Remember when Pauline got plucked out of obscurity for Mario Odyssey? Why can't they just do that for Stanley? I'm sure Nintendo will continue to give Stanley tiny little appearances like in the next Smash or WarioWare like they've been doing, but I don't have high hopes of him ever becoming a properly playable character ever again. It seems like he's doomed to forever be a cameo instead of being a proper character once more. It's crazy to think of what could have been with Stanley if Donkey Kong 3 didn't shit the bed. We could have Stanley in Mario Kart, we could have Stanley in Mario Party, we could even have Stanley in sports games. Who knows though, Nintendo has been known to make some weird nostalgic choices, like making freaking Nene and Poo Poo the Ice Climbers playable in Smash Bros. Oh well. If you don't hit the like button and subscribe to me and Stanley are gonna come to your house in the middle of the night and hit you with bug spray. Now do you really want that?